Welcome to this Indiana Professional Management Group informational webinar, Communicating with Schools, Collaborative Strategies for Positive Outcomes. I am Patricia Lovett, Professional Development Specialist at IPMG. Before I introduce today's presenter, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items related to this session. First, webinar attendees will receive an email verifying their attendance one day after the webinar, so tomorrow. IPMG employee owners should use this email as the certificate to upload for training credit. Also, the recording of this session will be posted on IPMG's website in the resources section in the next 3 to 4 business days. Finally, if you have a question during the session, we invite you to add it to the questions box. We will pause occasionally for time to answer questions along the way if there are some to answer. So make sure you add those in the questions box. We'll also try to leave a little time at the end for answering questions as well. Please be sure that you only add general questions in the questions box. If you have specific questions about your case, go on and write those down and then reach out to your contact at IPMG. Now, I am glad to tell you a little about our presenter for today's webinar. Jill Summerlot is the webinar coordinator for InSource. She has been with InSource since 2001. She has 3 children, one of whom has multiple special needs. Jill also has a special interest and expertise in bullying prevention. Jill, we are so glad to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing from you today. I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and everyone. I am Jill Summerlot, the webinar coordinator. What you see up on the screen, if you would please navigate your device to the QR code and scan that code for me, I would greatly appreciate it because we do have a training sign-in and we will have some resources for you to access during the presentation as well. And at the end, you would be able to take a training survey and you will be able to print off a certificate as well. And I really appreciate for you to do that because we are a grant-funded organization and we rely heavily upon those grants, and that is part of what our grants do require. We are going to be talking about communicating with schools. And so today we're going to talk about the importance of that and how to effectively communicate in some of the tools that we're going to be able to use. Again, my name is Jill Summerlot. Please feel free to put any questions that you have for me in the question box on your screen. We're going to, again, talk about communicating with schools. I have been with InSource since 2001. I currently am the webinar coordinator. Previously, for the last 2 years, I've been on doing the webinars, but I've been doing the webinars collectively for the last 14 years. Prior to that, along with that, I was what they called a liaison. And so I lived in the community, worked in the community, and I covered a territory basically of parents and schools. And so I worked directly with parents up until about 2 years ago. So that just gives you a little bit of information about me. I do need to give you the legal disclaimer. We are not attorneys. We are not any sort of legal advice agency. We're not a law firm. If you have legal special education questions, I highly encourage you to reach out to a very competent special education attorney and ask them those questions. I'm merely here just to give you a presentation, give you information, and that information will be able to empower you to become a better advocate for your child or for your families that you work with. InSource, again, is a grant-funded parent organization. We are part of a national network. Most of the employees that work with InSource are parents of children with disabilities. If they don't, they have a family member that has a disability. I would like to remind you that all of our services that we offer to parents are free of charge. and there will never be a fee that they have to pay. We do accept contributions because those cover expenses that aren't allowed through our grant funding. So some of the ways that we can help you and your families, we support families statewide. We have regional staff, those liaisons, they are scattered throughout the state of Indiana. They are, the question popped up. Will you show the code at the end of the webinar? Absolutely, Annette, I sure will. Thank you for asking that, but yes, I will do that. So we have the regional staff scattered throughout the state of Indiana. And this way we are able to live in our community, we work in our community, and we also help build those relationships with those schools, those special education directors, all of that important contacts that we need to have. And we help that so that parents are able to know that we have those working relationships so that they are better equipped to be able to come to us and say, hey, I have a problem with Mrs. Smith, I'm needing some help. Absolutely, we can help you. And I also have a contact that I can reach and get in touch with, and so that we can resolve that. So that's kind of, helps whenever you're navigating that system and you have those parents that live in that community. You're more in touch. You more have a pulse on what's going on. We do provide phone assistance, electronic assistance. We can attend case conferences and 504 meetings as long as we can get those on our schedules far enough in advance. Every staff person runs their own schedule. So it's up to that each individual liaison on what they can put on their schedule. So if I called and as a parent needed somebody to attend a case conference tomorrow, it would be completely up to that person on whether or not they can get them into their schedule. We do have several online learning opportunities. Like you're listening to the presentation today, I do presentations throughout the whole month. And we have every other Thursday, we do webinars. And scattered throughout the month, I do webinars during the day and some in the evenings. And we have in-person trainings too that you can access. We try to help families to understand what their rights and their children's rights are as those educational rights and responsibilities. And, that information is provided so that they can empower themselves, so that they can become better advocates for their child or for their families. And so that's one way that we do try and strive to help families. We want to make sure that we are giving out very good quality information, very good quality services to parents. And part of that is through that grants that we have. And when I keep saying grants, we have funding through Indiana Department of Special Education, the United States Department of Special Education. We now have the United States Department of Education Family Engagement Grant, and we also have part of the Lilly Endowment. So we have several layers here, and that's why it's so important for families and anyone that attends our trainings to fill out those sign-ins, to fill out those surveys. I highly, I highly ask parents and, people that attend, providers, schools, please fill out the survey on how our presentation is. If I don't do something that particularly that you like, or you have suggestions, please fill those out because that's the only way we're going to become better. So let's get into this relationship and how we're going to be able to build on it. Whenever you start talking to parents that have children in school, and you are generally talking about a child that goes to school for 13 years. You're talking about kindergarten and then 12 years of school. So in my case, my son attended school when he started 3. So he attended the developmental preschool. So that added 2 more years onto his schooling because he went from 3 to 5 and then went to kindergarten. So you're talking 15 years of being in school, and we just happened to be in the same school system for that entire 15 years. Um, when you fill out the form, how do we know it was submitted? I submitted the form and it takes me back to a clear form again. I need to fill it out again. If you filled it out once, don't worry about it. It should, it should go through, but I wouldn't worry about doing it twice. If it's an error that's for some reason not clicking today, don't worry about it. I we'll just have to fix it on our other end. Okay. All righty. Um, So you're talking 15 years of being in the same school system. That is a very long time whenever you start to think about relationships. I was very fortunate in having the opportunity to keep my son in the same school system. But we live in a very small community. We had 2 elementaries, we have 1 middle school and 1 high school, so we didn't have to worry about, particularly going to different schools. My husband and I were very fortunate that we could live in the same house and, all of those things. Um, so the relationship that I built with the staff and with my special education cooperative, because that's what I was under, was very vital for me. And so, when you talk about that, like my director, I had a director of special education that I actually had 4 directors before we left school, but generally the staff stayed the same. And so they knew about my son. They knew about how I worked. They knew how I would react to certain situations because they had built that relationship with me as well. So that just kind of tells you a little bit about why I feel it's so important about having those relationships and to be able to even take those relationships with you to another school, to be able to, have that reputation really is what you're talking about, to move to another school. So we're going to compare relationships you have with the school and other service providers. It's kind of like it's like a bank account. We need to watch our balance and to become a better advocate for our students, for our children. We need to be able to have access to that bank account. So those really good, positive working relationships, that collaboration, all of those negotiation skills, those all go hand in hand. And you see up on the screen, William Ure, he is one of the leading negotiation specialists. He has mediated many different types of conflicts, ranging from corporate mergers to strikes to ceasefire. So he's really been in the trenches. He knows how to do this. So he discusses the relationship as the type of capital building. So a good relationship is like a savings account that you can draw on in the moments of trouble. And absolutely, how true is that? Whenever we talk about getting to know the school staff, getting to know those people that we need to make deposits to, and in order to build our account. And so building those accounts isn't monetary, but it's trust with one another. And so whenever we have concerns that come up, whenever we have those times of conflict, whenever we have those times that we have to agree to disagree, we want to be able to take from our bank. We want the people that are working with us to know that we are a team player. We want them to know that we are there to help with our child and to be able to let them know that there may be a problem, but we're going to resolve it because we're going to agree to disagree. I am so sorry. My son let my dog in the room. Please let me go and let her out. I apologize.
Jill, I'm sure we all understand, and thank you for letting us know. So we'll just take a brief moment here, and Jill will be right back with us. Feel free to ask any questions in the question and answer box as she's tending to her little puppy, and we'll get started back up here in just a second.
I'm sorry, he works nights and he just assumed I wasn't doing anything apparently today. Anyway, so you see how a good relationship will um, become clearer and how it will become better to have that relationship in the long run. And so, again, I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here saying that we all have to sit around and agree and sing kumbaya all the time. And life is just wonderful because it's not always wonderful. Let's just face it, things do come up, differences come up, but it's how we react upon those situations and how we've reacted prior to that. And so that's a real it's just very important to make sure that we kind of keep things, we treat others how we want to be treated. And that's really what this comes down to. And so we're going to dive a little bit further into that. So communication, it's very effective when everybody involved is on the same page, whenever everybody understands what other people are thinking. Again, it's not necessary to agree with each person. It's not necessary to agree with those opinions. But, it's kind of like the old game of tin cans where you have, and for those of you that weren't around in the 60s, 70s, the tin can game was a piece of string and two tin cans literally on the end of that string, and you would play the telephone game. So if we played the telephone game, we know that it's not really very effective communication. We know that you don't always hear things, you don't always see things, you don't have that empathy for what the conversation is. So it's not as effective as it can be because communication it's an active process. It is a two-way process. There has to be a person that is sending, there has to be a person that's receiving. So it really involves several layers of, sharing ideas, being able to share information, to be able to even share your beliefs. It involves those listening and understanding skills and being able to take that information and beliefs of others. Again, it's not that you're wanting to sit around and, sing kumbaya and get along, but we have to know that there is a responsibility for each of us to have an outcome in those conversations and meetings. And so, with that, we want to make sure that that communication is very clear and very understandable. So we want to also make sure that, background noise, and sometimes that's that excessive talking, maybe not understanding words and jargon, acronyms. I am so there, and I do that a lot. And so I try to remind people that if I use an acronym that you don't understand, please ask what it is because I'm so used to speaking this jargon that after being in the position for 23 years, you just start spouting things off and don't even realize sometimes that you're talking to a parent that's never been in a case conference, or you're talking to a parent that has no idea what a BIP is. And you can sometimes, if you're sitting with them, you can see that. And other times, if you're sitting on something a platform like this, you don't see it. And so I have to be very careful of those things. And that goes with anybody that follows in this circle. And so I always say, special education, we do love our acronyms. So just be mindful of any of those things. And if I say something today that you don't understand, you will not offend me. It will not, it won't be anything. It'll be me sitting here going, oh, yeah, you're right. I need to explain that a little bit more. So please, whatever you need. And if you don't want to do it on the platform, you're more than welcome to contact me afterwards. So whenever we talk about communication, we focus more on what we're communicating than on how we're communicating. So, and communication is more than just talking. It's just more than talking. There are some nonverbal signs and characteristics that can convey a lot. Your body language can be one. You know, um, you could be a finger tapper or a finger pointer. I'm a finger pointer, especially if I'm upset. And so I know that's a very verbal sign. Um, I have been in meetings where people have been foot tappers. I have been in meetings where people have rolled their eyes. And I always tell people, I can hear your eyes roll. You may not think I can, but I can, because there's a breath and everything that goes along with that. There is a lot to say about that body language, those non-verbal things that we do. The vocal signs, that tone, that voice, that volume, that pace of speech. And I come from a very loud family. And so sometimes my voice is very boisterous and very loud. And it's not that I'm upset, it's just, how I am. So I really have to watch my tone and my volume whenever I am in a highly stressful situation. And so I've learned that I have to do that. So the visual is 55% of what people hear and see. The vocal is at 38%. So that 7%, which is so surprising, is that spoken word. And so, it doesn't matter what you say sometimes, it's that visually how you say it. You're pointing your finger, you're tapping your finger, or I've been in meetings where people are fist bangers. And so those are what people remember. That body language, those vocal cues, those tend to be so honest and so much more than words. So we really need to watch that body language and that vocal, because verbal, you guys, nobody's going to remember what I said. They're going to remember me banging my fist. They're going to remember me pointing my finger or my rolling my eyes. They are going to remember that, or that heavy breathing, or that type of thing. So just be mindful of how those things come across. So why it's very important to pay attention to the nonverbal messages that we're sending, it's equally important to attune the nonverbal messages that we're sending. And if you've ever had the chance to read Stephen Covey's book on 7 highly effective habits, one of the habits is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. Pretty simple, pretty much is self-explanatory. But think about the times that you've been introduced to somebody and you shake their hands and then you walk away and you don't remember what their name was. And that is so common. It's a very common experience to have. And it's very easy to be preoccupied with the impression we make on that takes over the ability to focus on that person. So we're so worried about ourselves that we're not, living that experience of trying to remember somebody's names. And you guys, I will be the first one to tell you right now, I'm horrible with names. And depending upon the situation I'm in, it can be that I am just so nervous that I don't remember their name. And so that puts me into that position of I am so nervous and trying to make sure that I'm coming across then I'm not paying attention to what that person is saying. We always want to achieve those good, positive working relationships between parents and schools, and to adhere to Stephen Covey's ideas, because when we do have the ability to understand someone else's viewpoint, we are in a better way, a better place to have the negotiation ability. And so listening and understanding can help us understand what the person needs. And again, it's not, we don't always have to agree. We can agree to disagree. But it's really important that whenever we are in those conversations, that we can suggest options and have those suggestions to maybe meet partway. Maybe they are meeting somebody else's need. And when we do that, there is such a greater chance for us to be successful at that problem solving. And when we're in that situation of problem solving and we're communicating, effectively, our children, our students receive better outcomes. And we know that. So that's why, one of the reasons why it's so important to make sure that we are communicating. So how can you tell if someone is really listening to you? And please feel free to put comments in the chat box. What kind of things do they say or do? And how do you know when someone really isn't listening? I'm just going to give you a few seconds to, maybe if you would like to put something in the chat box, to think about that, because this is active listening. And active listening is definitely one of those things that you should be able to respond to someone else. You should be able to have that mutual understanding. And when you're actively listening, then that means that you are hearing what they're saying, you're paying attention. You can definitely tell you what their name is, and you're not sitting there rolling your eyes. You're not being a part of that bad behavior. We have paraphrase to show I'm listening. Absolutely. I will try to restate what was said to ensure I understood correctly. Eye contact and head nods. Absolutely. And those are things that I look for. They reflect back what you have said. They really do. And giving direct eye contact. And those are all very good. And that's exactly what you should be doing. And, just that eye contact alone is so important, because that does show how much you are paying attention. And whenever you're sitting there and you're paying attention, and you lean in even, or you ask for clarification, a lot of times I will say, especially if I've noticed in a case conference or a meeting with a parent that they kind of look kind of puzzled, and then I will just ask back to whoever's conducting the meeting, what I thought I heard you say was, and then they can come back and they will say, yeah, that's what I said, da 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 da. And so that way I also know that my parents heard it again. And then I can look for them for more of those body language things, that they did understand something. So those do definitely help whenever you're in those situations of being in a meeting. And I don't know how many of you sit in those meetings and do those type of things, but it always helps whenever you're watching like that. So, oops. The strategies for active listening. So when we talk about the active listening, and we want to ensure that we are part of that, just like we had said earlier, you do ask those questions. So ask those clarifying questions. Ask for understanding. And, do make that eye contact. Lean forward. You want to encourage maybe what they've said, agree with what they said, paraphrase, ask for that clarification again. when we talk about focusing on feelings, be very careful with that. However, make sure that you are recognizing those. Again, because that's part of recognizing when things can kind of go awry, um, and know that when things kind of can go up and down. Um, that again knows those when you're that part of that active listening of tone, pitch, and what the conversation is leading to. And you can always ask for a summarization of what your conversation is. You know, it's kind of like asking in a case conference for the case conference notes. So, a case conference notes are nothing but a summarization of the conversations that you had. And so, there's nothing wrong with that, asking for that at all. So, that's just part of some of those strategies for active listening. But let's talk a little bit about the passive communication. And that's not just clearly stating those wants and needs and opinions. That is also having attitude that's characterized by thinking of others know more, others won't listen, so there's no need for me to speak up. Um, there's a feeling of being powerless, having very little value. It's also a result of not getting your desired outcomes and sometimes even feeling resentful. But being passive can sometimes be confused with being polite. And we know that it really is possible to be polite and to state our opinion. And so whenever we talk about that passive attitude, and please don't again don't misconstrue that I'm sitting here telling you that you have to always, have an opinion or have something. It's okay sometimes to sit and listen and not say anything. Just make sure, especially whenever we're talking about parents, that they're not being in that situation of feeling powerless or feeling like there's no need to say anything. And a lot of times, for those of you that attend those case conferences, whether you be a parent or you be a service provider, I'm sure you've been in case conferences or had conversations where you heard a parent probably say, "It doesn't matter what I say, they're not going to listen to me." And that's that's unfortunate because that's not what we want to hear. What we want to hear them say is a little bit different. And so that moves us really into that aggressive communication. And that is behaving with anger. And, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation with a parent that went from passive to aggressive in just a matter of 60 seconds. Um, because all of a sudden, then they're tired of it. They're just tired of not being heard. They're tired of somebody telling them what they can have and what they can't have. And so we want to make sure that as we work with families, as we work with parents, and if you are a parent, we want to make sure that we're kind of seeing those warning signs of being um, starting that aggressiveness, starting whenever that is going to maybe um, get out of control. And after you've been in this position for a while, I think you start to notice tones and you start to be able to recognize it a lot quicker. But I will tell you, I have been in several meetings, and one in particular, I had to grab a parent because she was going over the table after she was going after that principal, and I could just see his necktie becoming part of the problem. And we want to make sure that it's not our job to protect them, but it's our job to make sure that we try to keep things at a, not such a aggressive situation. You know, um, when we talk about that aggression, sometimes it's easy for that to become making others listen to us and to even violate others' rights by overpowering them or even making demands. Being aggressive really results in people remembering the aggression. They don't hear what you said. They don't remember anything about the meeting. They don't remember anything about those concerns or wants or needs that your child needs. All they remember is I was a parent that was aggressive and got out of control. And that's what they're going to always remember. And so whenever we need to go back and to use that bank account, most of the time they're going to remember that you were that aggressive part, and that there's no bank account for you to be able to go back on now. And so we just need to be careful that we're not being that aggressive. So an assertive attitude can be characterized by thinking that you're an equal partner, that you do have rights to express, and you can express those opinions and concerns in that safe environment. And being assertive also results in being heard and respected, and that's ultimately really what we want. We want to be heard and we want to be respected, not only as a provider, not only as a school corporation, but also as a parent. We would like for schools and providers to understand that we just are being heard and we are being respected. So we can practice some assertive skills here. And so I'm going to give you just a few seconds and we're going to kind of run through these. And if you just would type in your answer in the chat box, that's if you want to play along. Okay. So the scenario for assertive communication is your child has an orthopedic impairment and is struggling to get around the school. A classroom aide is the only available occasionally to assist. Peers are often enlisted to assist him, but are not always available. You've asked for a one-on-one aide, and the school said, we have no money for an aide at this time. So how might you respond to that statement? Your chat's disabled. Go ahead and put them in the question and answer box then, Lisa. Thank you very much. So whenever we talk about this assertive communication, what do you think would be the response? You legally have to provide an aid, smile nicely, and ask for the forms to file for due process. How is school ensuring health and safety? And what steps have you gone through to get the funding for the aid? Those are really all very good questions. And ask them how they plan to address my child's needs. Those are all very good questions. And thank you so much for answering those. You absolutely want to be able to ask the questions and to be able to ask them in a way that ask them what ideas they have for a resolution. Could the school do volunteer aids? If it is in the IEP, I would ask that you abide by that since it is legally binding contract. Absolutely. And support the needs and safety and ask for what they plan to do in the meantime as they look to hire more staff who is available to help consistently because there is a demonstrated need and it involves safety. Very good. Very, very good. Those are all great answers. And I would highly recommend that if you're ever in a situation that you go back and use these questions that you've asked, because we do know that whenever we talk about any sort of navigating through the school system, and that would be part of it, that it's also covered under transportation. But if it's in the IEP, it has to be done as written. No money is ever a parent's issue. Money is not something that should determine any sort of services. Money is not the driving force of anything. It is a individualized education program. That's what an IEP is. So it has to be individualized. And again, it's not the responsibility on a schoolmate either to provide, any of those services. Nor would you want a child to be in charge of that. And I will always go back onto if there was a fire or some sort of incident in the school, who's going to be in charge of getting that child out of the school. So what ideas do you have in the meantime while staff is unavailable to ensure safety? That's a really good question. And that is one of those things that whenever we are sitting in those case conferences, we need to make sure that that is brought up. So who is going to be in charge of those things? And, again, if somebody brings up money in a case conference, I would highly encourage you to say, money is not what we're here to discuss. What we're here to discuss is little Johnny or little Sarah. And we need to know how we're going to help this child navigate through that school system. Very good. All very good answers. So thank you very much. So let's try another one. Your child has made little progress in reading goals the past 2 years and is 2 grade levels behind her peers. You've asked for a reading program for her that will address her reading deficits. The school responds that the reading program she is currently using is a good program and that your daughter needs to apply herself more. So what do you think on these? And I don't know if you guys are hearing this more or not, but that up on the screen is something that we do hear a lot of, that they're not applying themselves, that they are not, you know, um, they're lazy. And when you start to hear those things, there is, you really kind of want to ask the question, not so much why are we blaming the student or this child, but are you saying that you can't educate them? Okay. Then I would also say, okay, then this seems to be maybe a behavior. And so we know that we can look at behaviors through a behavioral intervention plan. And so let's talk about getting a behavioral intervention plan together. Because sometimes you will glean out of that behavior plan or that functional behavioral assessment, you are going to glean out of there a lot more than what a child just being lazy or doesn't want to do their work is. Okay, let's go up here and look at some of the questions. Please explain to me what you mean she needs to apply herself more. Absolutely. That's a very good question. Use evidence. Documented is not working for this individual child. What other opinions are available because evidence shows it's not working and there is a need for something else? What makes you think she's not applying herself? I get with my own kid that she is not teachable any longer. She has plateaued. I'm going to go off on a tangent right now. Then that tells me that we need to be in that case conference, not talking about her not being teachable anymore, but what the school can do to provide her to be able to move past that plateau. And are they no longer able to teach her? Because at that point, then you're talking about a different situation. If the school is not, if they're saying they're not able to teach her, then there needs to be an alternative place then. We need to be talking about where can they go then to be taught. Um, so that's kind of off on my little tangent if you want me to go there. How can we collaborate together to create a stronger reading program, both at home and at school? What strategies can we look at within the school and what can we do at home? Absolutely. I would remind them that failing 2 full grades behind cannot solely be the result of not applying themselves. Oh, absolutely. And how does she need to apply herself more? Are there some changes that need to be made to the program for my child? Those are all really good questions that you could absolutely ask in that case conference because that's what you're looking for and you're looking for data. And just about every one of your comments has to do with the data part. Maybe the current curriculum is not working. Could we look at another reading program or add some with behavioral assistance? Absolutely. And those are all really good questions. And part of those questions too become whenever they're not maybe performing or doing what the school's wanting. Again, when we do some sort of a behavioral assessment or we do some sort of evaluation, it gives us more of an insight and more of a snapshot into what that child is doing. You know, we have found, I, I should say this, I have found a lot of information out of a functional behavioral assessment just by asking if we can track somebody. You know, I just want to know how many times they're on task in a 5-minute setting. And you would be surprised what you get, the information that comes from. You will get either, yes, they're always on task, or man, they are off task every 30 seconds. Then you start to drill it down. Why are they off task? What's going on? And so it doesn't always mean that they're lazy or they're not paying attention or it's all their fault, because we know there's usually more that's layered. It's like an onion. We have to keep peeling that onion off of that child. Great questions, you guys. I really appreciate the input. There should also be some testing. There's a lot of hidden learning disabilities. There is, Deborah, you are exactly right. And what is the relationship like with the instructor of the reading program? Could that connection be challenged in how much a child is wanting to engage? And, you know, there's always personality conflict. And, you know, that sometimes needs to be taken into consideration as well. And so I would highly encourage you, if you see things like that, to have that conversation. So, you know, steps in problem solving, and we can combine our good communication skills and systematically problem solving to help advocate for our child more effectively. And it's always good to use those good communication skills and to be involved in those problem solving arenas. We know that problem solving skills and good communication is always going to equal that effective results. They're always going to equal that good working relationship. And how we start by problem solving is we have to define the problem. So what is the problem and how do we define it? And we have to give thought to what the problem really is. Let's go back to the fact that you just told me that my child is not paying attention, or my child is reached a plateau. So what problem really is this? And how is the student affected? You know, if we go just to the plateau um, of one of our attendees, then how is that affecting students? How is that affecting her? And we really want to be able to think clearly about that and to be able to state it clearly. And, you know, as a parent, and if somebody told me that my child had plateaued, I would really want to find out a little bit more. So you're telling me that my child is plateaued. Explain to me what that really means. And have them explain it to you. And then I would ask the question, so if they've plateaued, then what is she or he doing during the day? And how is that affecting them? Because you know it's going to affect them at some point during the day. Be ready to gather that information, be ready to gather data so that you can support your position. You want to be able to also provide evidence, and you can go back into those IEPs, look at those progress reports, look at the notes. You can meet face to face whenever you need to. You can meet face to face with the teacher of record. I would encourage that in a situation where we were just discussing that a child has plateaued, I would be ready to listen to some suggestions. However, I would also be ready to bring some suggestions to the table. And that way we could be at the point of maybe even comparing solutions or comparing ideas on how we're going to move past that plateau And you want to have a resolution is what you really want to do. And us as parents, we are not well, I am not an educator, so I could never even come close to guessing what a classroom was like. I could not come close to telling you what I learned in college in order to be able to be in that classroom. I can tell you from the side of a parent and on how my child acts at home, how my child acts when we're doing homework. I can tell you those things. And so, out of those things, I'm going to bring you my data, my um, information, my suggestion, what's working at home. That way, you can discuss all of those possibilities. And you want to be able to say, hey, you're saying that they plateaued. However, little Sally at home just learned to tie her shoes. And you say she's plateaued. That's not how this is. Little Sally has just been able to feed herself. That's not a plateau. She's learned more. So there's things that you can bring to the table whenever you start talking about those. And I don't mean to pick on that situation. It's just it's an easy one to pull out so that you can think about it because it's a real life problem. We want to make sure that we are also within that trying to strive for a positive attitude and think about ways to make the life of that student's benefit more. And we always want to talk about success. We don't ever want to leave the success piece behind because we know, just as a parent, you don't want to hear all the time, well, she's plateaued, or, well, had a behavior, well, didn't do this, again, failed this class. Those aren't things we want to always hear. It may always happen, but there's got to be something in a child's day. At some point, a child done something good. At some point, a child succeeded. They had success. We still have to look for those positives. And I cannot stress that enough, especially whenever you're a parent and that's all you ever hear. And I have flipped case conferences around by simply saying, I hear what you're saying, and I understand that you are having some difficulties with little Sally trying to learn more. But can you tell me what she did good? Can you tell me if she smiled at you today? Pretty thought provoking, isn't it? And it's not that you're wanting somebody to always give you the good. It's not that you're always wanting somebody to, sugarcoat anything for you. What you're wanting is to make sure that the staff that's working with your child or anybody that's coming into contact with your child knows that there are some positives, especially on paper. You want to see those positives. I statement. We need to use I statements instead of you statements. And you can accuse me of this all day long. And I do that a lot. And I after 23 years, I'm still working on it. But I statements make you take responsibility as a speaker. And you're taking responsibility for that conversation, for that communication. But I statements always are avoiding blame. And excuse me, they're always taking away that accusing statements. And usually whenever you're hearing you stop listening, and you're very defensive. And we don't want people to stop listening. We want them to always be engaged with our conversation. So I statements are useful when stress is present, and whenever you know that there's a high highly stressful situation, practice what maybe you're going to say so that you do use those I statements. And there's nothing wrong with practicing in front of a mirror. I've done it many times. whenever things would come up about my son that I knew that were going to be very confrontational, I would bounce it off of that mirror. I would bounce it off of my husband, and excuse me, so that whenever I did go in there, I didn't lose my temper, and I didn't accuse anybody of anything. And so it was a better way for me to kind of de-escalate myself, because we want to make sure that we are diffusing any of those relationships, and we want to make sure that we're building the relationships. And so staying away from those use statements are so much better. One of the examples that we have is, you told me my student is learning the multiplication tables. You told me. And so other saying that, you can say, I think I heard you say that my student is learning the multiplication tables. Is that correct? I'm concerned that my student has been unable to learn the multiplication tables. What do the test results say? Those are just some of the ways to take away those you statements and to turn them into I statements. Effective problem solving, we use those positive ways to address conflict. Again, state the common goal. And the good way to begin the conversation is to say something like, I know we have the same goal to help Johnny, and we know that we want him to have more success in school. So focusing on the fact that you have the same goal, this is going to help everyone focus on that common goal. Use and instead of but. And an example of that would be, I know we need to help John get his behavior under control, but he's just a boy. Or, I know we need to help John get his behavior under control and consider ways to help him be successful in school. Sounds a little bit better whenever you say that. Use I instead of you. I want to talk to you about my daughter, on what my daughter is learning, instead of, you're not helping my daughter. And I'm sure we've all heard those things. But I want to talk to you about what my daughter is learning. We want to focus on the positives rather than the negatives and those absolutes. A negative can be, what can't you? And a positive would be, what if, or how can we? Those have different rings, different tones to them. And so if we can use those things instead of the yous and the buts, that comes across as being more of a team player, if you really want the truth. We also want to make sure that we're using people first language. And so my son with autism, not my autistic son, my daughter with diabetes, not my diabetic daughter. And this is a part where I always throw in that personal peace of mind. There is a book called, it's written by Kathy Snow, and it talks about people first language. And it is an old book. I mean, it came out back whenever my son was first diagnosed. And so he was born in 1997. So you're talking, 28 years ago. It's a really good book, though, to be able to kind of think about some of those things and give you thought and pause to how we do talk about people first language. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So in conclusion, remember that there are specific steps to have effective problem solving, and to use those I statements. And this helps, to get that message across, and it doesn't accuse or it doesn't blame people. And whenever possible, focus on the student's needs. It's more likely that the adults who are responsible for helping support the student learn and will contribute to that success. So just try and use those things that are up on the screen, and be aware of your body language, be aware of those the way you say things. And again, I'm not trying to say sit around and sing Kumbaya all day. Okay, this does bring us to the end of the presentation. Real briefly, we do have a volunteer program. If anyone is interested, please, you can contact InSource. You can also contact us at our main office in South Bend. We do have a call center there. You can contact us at insource.org. Feel free to email us. You can also jump on our website, and we do have a chat feature on our website. We also have a chat feature on our Facebook page. And so please, you're more welcome to find us anywhere on the other platforms. Okay, there's a question. Can you please show summary slide quickly before ending the webinar so I can grab the last few points? Absolutely, I can go back. And you do, they do have a copy of the PowerPoint, so please feel free to take that PowerPoint and use it. Again, if you need any questions from me, I am more than happy to help you with them. I know that it's 11:01 and I'm 1 minute into your time, so I don't want to take up any more so that get in trouble. I want to be invited back.
Certainly not. Thank you, Jill, for sharing such a great and informative presentation with us today. We also appreciate everyone who took time to join us and learn more about how to make communicating with schools a collaborative, productive experience. I know we got right up to the time, so I'm sure that Jill is open to email questions as well if you had them. I know she shared, or in the chat that she mentioned. So certainly I would encourage you to take advantage of those if you have additional questions. In the meantime, the next IPMG informational webinar is scheduled for November 8th, 2024, and will feature Sherry Kripe, the Assistant Director of MESA and the MESA School Bullying Prevention Director at Purdue University. MESA is a program dedicated to empowering communities and preventing violence across Indiana. Sherry will be presenting Bullying Prevention, How You Can Make a Difference. Join us for an insightful presentation on recognizing the warning signs that your child may be experiencing bullying. Learn effective strategies for parents to support their children and address bullying concerns. The session will also cover the growing issue of cyberbullying, providing practical advice on how to protect children online. Additionally, you'll discover ways to establish healthy screen time limits, fostering a balanced and safe digital environment for your family. Empower yourself with the knowledge and tools to support your child's well-being and safety and how you can make a difference. The registration address is on this slide and will also be shared, I believe, in the chat and sent out via IPMG communication channels soon. We hope to see you there. Thank you all and have a great day. Thank you, Jill, for joining us.
Thank you so much. And can I just really quickly take up a minute of your time, and I'm going to run back to the beginning of our screen. But
Yes,
Sherry will be also,
code.
Sherry's going to present for us too in October, and she will be presenting free Thursdays. And so feel free to jump on any of those with us as well, okay? But that's it. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today, ladies and gentlemen. I do appreciate it. So thank you so much. And again, you have a wonderful weekend. Here is the QR code for our information.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
ladies.
much.